Welcome back to another Selling Point episode. Today we want to look at a topic called the secret to winning. And so what I want to start with is the way we tend to look at people that are successful in sales. If you look over the group at your company or any company that has a group of winners for the year, and they have their president's club, or they have their chairman's group, or whatever they call that particular cadre of winners for the year, a lot of times you look at them and you say, I can't believe that dude sold $3 million this year. Or I can't believe she was in the top 10 of the company for this year, because we're looking at the wrong things. We tend to think that the secret is looks, or it's talent, or it's maybe a degree that you have, or a pedigree that you had. You came up in the right family, and maybe you had money behind you, or a fancy education. But those things are all superficial. Sometimes they're important, but they're not the key. The key is desire. And so without it, no matter what you do, you're going to end up failing. There was a fella last century named Napoleon Hill, and this guy spent 20 years going around and studying people who had been successful. And what he did is he established sort of a common denominator and wrote a book called Think and Grow Rich. Fortunately, I was able to get a copy years ago, and it changed my life. He wrote this book in 1937. Now, I'm not going to make you go through and read the book, but what I do want to do today is to go over his game plan, because he boiled down his book with 6 simple steps that he said it took to be the secret to winning. The first one, and I'll run through these, and then I'll give you an example of how it relates to me as maybe a benchmark that would help you. First off, he says you got to have a specific goal. You got to know exactly what you're shooting for. If you don't, you don't know where you're going. And so secondly, he says that you got to set up a specific time frame in order to achieve that particular goal. The third thing he says is that you've got to write it down. You've got to commit that to paper and have that where you can look at it. Fourthly, he said you have to develop a plan to achieve that goal. And then number 5, he said you got to sit down and figure out what kind of price am I willing to pay in order to make this goal become a reality for me. And then sixthly, the final one is he says you got to think about it every day, not every other day, but every day. So he states in his book that these 6 steps cannot be overlooked if you really want to make it. Now, let me give you an example of my situation. I know firsthand that what he wrote about will work for you because it's worked for me over my life. First off, you got to realize that success is not going to happen overnight. If you think you're going to read a book or attend a seminar or watch a video and then go out and be a plastic fantastic and go to the top within months or the first year, that's not going to happen. So you got to first off realize that if you want it bad enough, you've got to realize that it's going to take some time. But when you do, you can win too in whatever objective that you want to set up. Now, the steps, he said, the first one he said is you've got to set a specific goal. Now, I did that in my life. I was in my early 30s before I really kind of woke up and smelled the coffee and realized what I was up against in life. And so at that point in time, I set up a specific goal of becoming debt-free. But not only did I want to become debt-free, I wanted to be totally financially independent, where I not only did not have any debts, didn't have a house payment, didn't have a car payment, all that, credit cards, all that kind of stuff, but that I also wanted to be in the kind of financial position that I would be able to help other folks and be able to do some of the things that I had already wanted to do in life, but not able to do that. maybe a missionary comes to your church and and they're talking about they're going to open up a new country and they need contributions to help them do that. And I always was moved to want to help them, but financially I couldn't do it. Or maybe there's a building program going on someplace and you'd love to contribute because it'd be good for the community, but you don't have the money to do that. And so it not only takes being debt-free, but it takes being totally financially independent to do that. The second thing he said is you got to set a specific time. And so in my case, wife and I talked about it, and we set up a time for us to be debt-free and totally financially independent by the time we were age 60, which would be a 25-year plan. Now, you might think, oh, my gosh, I got to do it quicker than that. Well, you probably won't unless, you're just really a shooting star. But in my case, we set out a plan for 25 years to slug it out and do what we could do to make that plan work. The third thing he said is you got to commit it to writing. And so we did. We sat down and wrote the plan out in terms of what we wanted to do specifically. The fourth thing he said is you got to develop a plan to achieve that goal. Not only write it down, but what's your action plan? How are you going to make that work? And so in our case, we set up a plan that we were not just going to live within our means, we were going to live below our means. And we did for years and years. We didn't buy things that we wanted and could have afforded because we had a bigger goal and a bigger plan in mind. And so every time that we got a pay raise on my job or my wife's nursing job, then we would increase our savings. Every time I got a bonus, I would put that bonus in. Instead of taking it and going to Hawaii and celebrating, we would plow that back in, trying to help achieve and reach our goal, which would have allowed us to go to Hawaii or any place else we wanted to do every year if we wanted to. And so that was our plan. And then the fifth thing he said is you got to determine what kind of price are you willing to pay to make that happen. So to do that, I just pulled the family together. We had a little family council meeting, and the kids were young, but they were old enough to understand what we were talking about. And so we laid the plan out to them. And of course, they could see that, things would be better for them and they would be able to get more stuff or whatever if the plan worked. So they were all in. And I shared with them the fact that, this is not just going to happen with me working 8-hour days on a regular job. I'm going to have to do something more than that. And so I shared with them how I'd end up having to miss some ball games and some dance recitals because I was out working trying to achieve this objective and this goal. And then finally, number 6, he says, you got to think about this every day. And we did that. I called them mileposts, and I would sit down and think every day kind of where we are, what's the next step, what's the end game. I had been in either sales or sales management for all those years. And so I trained my wife to be my sales manager. And so she was a good one. She was tough on me. And she always would point me to the goal. When I came dragging in with my knuckles dragging the ground after having a bad day, she'd rough me up a little bit. So that was the plan. And that's how I put the 6 steps in place in order to make that happen. And it did happen for us. And we achieved that goal right on pace. And since then, it's done nothing but get better, even though we've loosened up and spending more money, and I'm taking trips and doing things that I really want to do. But it's almost like we're on cruise control once you accomplish that. And so I hope these 6 points will make sense to you, and you don't try to short circuit that. Sit down and make those become a reality for you. One thing that might help you, if you notice behind me here, this is the Selling Point website, where every week we're putting up a new video, and we just got started with this, but we've got about what are there? There's 5 of them up there now, and we'll put one out every week with some strategies, ideas, some of them motivational, some of them strategic strategies and strategic things that you can do. And so you need to tune into that. And also, it would help to get a copy of my book, Sell is Not a 4-Letter Word. You can get that on my website at RobinsonTrainingSolutions.com. So till next time, have a great week.